Urgent! A global turning point. Donbas has blocked the negotiations. Sensational! The US tried to force Zelenskyy to agree over the phone. 5 hours of negotiations between Witkoff and Putin, and the revised proposal has become even tougher. Europe's feeders have rushed in urgently. Everything is being decided at this very moment. A burning breakthrough. The latest Ukrainian missiles targeting Moscow and Engels. This will pierce through Russia's defenses. Knees in the Kremlin are already shaking after hearing this. And a real information bomb. Zaluzhnyi has returned with a loud statement. And all of this happened just now. Greetings, I'm Rinat Aslanova and we're getting started. At this very moment, there will be no peace. The fate of Donbas has simply blocked the negotiations. So the whole process is stuck on the issue of territories. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that the US peace plan has been reduced from 28 to 20 points. The Americans want to find compromises, but there are none regarding territory. According to Zelenskyy, he has no right to give up Ukrainian land, and this is enshrined in the constitution.
We have no legal right whatsoever. According to Ukrainian law, our constitution, and international law, honestly, we don't even have the moral right. An exchange for security guarantees is also not being considered.
Zelenskyy also stated that there is a proposal from partners to exchange some time in the occupied part of Donetsk region from the nuclear power plant for territories that the Russians have not yet captured. The publication Axios writes that Trump's advisors wanted Zelenskyy to agree to surrender Donbas over the phone. As noted there, the US peace proposal became even worse for Ukraine. This happened after Trump's advisors, Witkoff and Jared Kushner, held a 5-hour meeting with Putin.
It felt like the US was trying in various ways to convince us that Russia wanted to seize all of Donbas. And the Americans wanted Zelenskyy to accept all of this during a phone conversation.
However, Zelenskyy replied that he had only received the US proposal an hour ago and had not yet read it, which angered Trump since, according to the publication's source, the US had delivered the updated proposal the day before. It is noted that the US proposal contained tougher conditions than previous versions, particularly on issues such as territory and control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Moreover, the proposal left key questions about security guarantees unanswered. The day before, the Ukrainian president met with the leaders of France, the United Kingdom, and Germany in London. The leaders discussed the interim results of the peace talks mediated by the US and security guarantees. At the meeting, the German chancellor stated that Germany firmly stands by Kiev, but has doubts about certain aspects of the American proposals.
No one should ever doubt our unwavering support for Ukraine. We firmly stand behind it, and the crucial decision regarding its future remains completely open. I am quite skeptical about some of the specific details we are currently seeing in the various documents coming from the United States, but it is absolutely essential that we thoroughly discuss this important matter.
Following the meeting, the British Prime Minister stated that issues concerning Ukraine are decided by Ukraine. Addressing Zelenskyy, Starmer emphasized that the United Kingdom firmly supports Ukraine and any ceasefire must be fair and long-lasting. Now Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in Brussels to meet with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, as well as for joint talks with European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. It has become known that the Czech Republic will transfer the latest weapon system to the USSR for strikes on Moscow and Engels. At the beginning of next year, Ukraine may receive modern Czech-made missiles and drones, which could significantly affect the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Thus, the Czech Republic has unveiled the new Narwhal cruise missile, which is planned to be delivered to Ukraine for strikes on targets in Russia. The developer is already conducting tests, and the final stage will be its evaluation in combat conditions. Experts clarify that the Narwhal is designed for a range of 680 kilometers, which is enough to strike targets deep behind enemy lines, including Moscow or the strategic Engels air base. The missile is capable of flying at a speed of 750 kilometers per hour and carrying a warhead weighing 120 kilograms. This is more than, for example, the Russian Shahed from Iran, which has 50 to 90 kilograms, making the Narwhal much more effective against a wide range of targets. But it's not just this missile that can become a nightmare for the enemy at night. The Norwegian government has announced new investments in the country's defense and will allocate 19 billion kroner to purchase a new ground-based missile system for the land forces, which will have a range of 500 kilometers. The acquisition of such a system has been called a strategically important initiative and will significantly increase the Army's strike capability. At the same time, as noted, a range of 500 kilometers is necessary, Norway needs it not just for the sake of it, but to be able to strike key Russian targets in the region. And such a range makes it possible to keep Murmansk, Russia's main port in the region, as well as the main Russian naval bases and air bases, including the well-known Olenia, within targeting range. InfoShock. Zaluzhnyi is once again making a loud statement about himself. Dependence solely on the supply of weapons from partners is unreliable, notes the former commander-in-chief. The ambassador of Ukraine in London and former commander-in-chief Valery Zaluzhny on Liga.net published his article, Politics and War, Reality versus Expectations, which he conceived even before stepping down from his position.
Without public support, a war cannot be successful. In
this article, the general essentially outlines a roadmap for the country's survival, after the war drastically changed its face at the end of 2023. And for the first time, he speaks not only about the front, but also about politics, on which every decision at the front line now depends.
Without public support, a war cannot be successful.
Zaluzhny bluntly states that Ukraine has reached a dead end without a clear political goal. There is an army, but the direction is unclear. Russia, on the other hand, is openly playing for its victory, the destruction of Ukraine as a state. But what Ukraine's victory would mean, no one is saying. According to Zaluzhny, this is a fatal mistake. Valery Zaluzhny has already gone beyond the scope of the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff. This opinion was expressed by diplomat Roman Besmertny in
the current situation, I would insist that the new coalition should have proposed a government. And in fact, his approaches are sufficient for him to lead this government. His understanding of this genesis of development. Because in any case, in the coming years, everything will revolve around issues of defense and security. And in this regard, the approaches are not yet complete. They need to be worked on.
a sensation. Putin simply blew up the chance for peace. The bunker dictator threw out Trump's peace proposal, which could have broken the unity between the US and Europe and lifted the suffocating sanctions from Russia. But that's not enough for Putin. He has come to believe that he can grab even more by continuing the bloody war. But what could all this turn into for Russia? Now, watch.
He started this war as a historic mission and a project to restore the empire.
Everyone must admit, and I have already said this, that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. And
has turned Russia into an economic, geopolitical, and human catastrophe.
I have made the decision to conduct a special military operation.
Today, Vladimir Putin is trapped in his own snare, and the longer the war drags on, the more obvious it becomes. He has no way out anymore. While the front has stalled, Moscow is desperately trying to present tactical shifts as strategic victories. Behind closed doors in the Kremlin, a much more significant episode has taken place. As The Guardian columnist Simon Tisdall writes, last week, US President Donald Trump, for reasons still unknown, offered the Russian dictator a lifeline in the form of a preliminary agreement that effectively rewarded aggression. On the table in Moscow lay a document that gave the Kremlin exactly what it had started the war for in the first place: control over part of Ukrainian territories.
But Putin, plagued by neo-imperial fantasies and problems of legacy, said no. He believes he can get all that and even more by continuing the fight. He convinced the fool Trump that Russia's victory is inevitable and the scheming Europeans are actually the real militant element. However, his assumption is fundamentally mistaken.
Almost 4 years into the Great War, but what was once the world's second army is still bogged down where it started. Meanwhile, inside the country, everything that was barely holding together is collapsing. After 2 years of artificial growth, fueled by military spending, Russia's oil and gas revenues have plummeted by 27%. Inflation has reached 8% and interest rates are above 16%. At the same time, state monopolies are drowning in debt. Foreign investment has almost disappeared. The import of strategic goods has become 122% more expensive. Substitutes for the population are rising in price.
The Russian economy now consists of two parts. As I say, two systems, military and civilian. That's exactly how it is. They operate under different rules. The military sector receives free money from the budget. And by the way, it also receives preferential loans at a reduced rate. Meanwhile, the civilian sector lives with the loan rates set by the central bank. These are two different parts of the economy. But the problem is that the military sector burns through budget money while the civilian sector brings money into the budget. But what happens is that the entire Russian economy is shifting into the military sector while the civilian sector is shrinking. And that means the budget's revenue base is decreasing. Meanwhile, spending on military purposes is increasing. That's why the Russian economy is distorted, just as the Soviet Union's economy was distorted. This is what's happening today. In other words, Russia today is moving in the direction of the Soviet Union.
But the main blow is not economic but strategic. Ukraine has found a weak spot that people in Moscow prefer not to talk about. The energy heart of Russia. Oil refineries, pipelines, and the shadow fleet of tankers that the Kremlin uses to bypass sanctions, all of this is now targeted by Ukrainian drones.
Ukraine has achieved such a systemic, comprehensive, I would indeed say widespread coverage of Russia's significant oil refining infrastructure and extensive oil refining complex. At the same time, drones have started increasingly reaching previously untouched areas they never reached before. That is specifically practically none of the vast regions in the Western European part of Russia extending all the way up to the Urals can feel safe anymore.
Strikes on Russia's rear areas are causing real panic. Two giants, Rosneft and Lukoil, are reporting supply disruptions. Asian buyers, especially China, are starting to distance themselves, fearing secondary US sanctions.
The main factor that will truly lead to a real and significant decrease in revenues from Russian oil exports is, first and foremost, additional secondary sanctions. We are now clearly seeing how both China and India have deliberately taken a cautious wait-and-see approach after significant sanctions were officially imposed on the major Russian energy companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, on October 22nd. Nevertheless, we are also seeing attempts to circumvent these sanctions using the shadow fleet, redirecting shipments and other types of manipulations which still allow these countries to buy at a significant discount. It is therefore very advantageous for them to continue buying Russian oil.
That is why experts consider the myth of Russia's inevitable victory to be nothing more than a propaganda smokescreen. Yes, Putin's advisors emphasize the successes near Avdiivka and Pokrovsk, claiming that Moscow has supposedly strengthened its negotiating position. But in reality, these advances are minimal and do not change the strategic picture at all. Mother Russia, despite having a numerical advantage, still failed to conquer Ukraine. And this is a failure of historic proportions. A failure measured in shocking numbers. More than 280,000 killed and wounded in just the first 8 months of 2025. And about 1 million over the entire course of the war.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A burning breach deep into Russia. Ukrainian Armed Forces drones have exacted such revenge that the Kremlin howled. Meanwhile, one of the key pro-war correspondents snapped and admitted something shameful. The world's second largest army can't even provide its soldiers with underwear and socks. A complete failure in front of the whole world. But this is only the beginning of the collapse of the Puzitsky front. Bad news for the enemy is pouring in like hail. All the details about what's happening at the front are in the military review.
Drones in Russia's Engels. There are an airfield and an oil depot belonging to the occupiers there. Drones also reached Volgograd, where they sparked a strong reaction among the local residents. 13. All the passports are here, so what's the problem? The occupiers near the Belgorod border are not sleeping peacefully. Well, while Ukrainians are attacking Russian military targets, the Russians in turn continue to shell peaceful Ukrainian civilians. This video shows the aftermath of a nighttime attack on Chernihiv, Ukraine. Russian forces attacked Oktyrka in the Sumy region. Hits were recorded on the roof and wall of one of the apartments in a 9-story building. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump, who has taken it upon himself to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine, claims that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is allegedly not ready to accept a so-called peace plan, if it can even be called that.
According to the legislation of the United States of America, adopted back in 2017 under Trump, and the law signed by Trump states that the US will not recognize any territories that Russia has annexed from Ukraine since 2014, because, again, there is a corresponding law. In other words, if you want to do what's written in this plan, to recognize Russian territories, first, you need to change your domestic legislation. Your own law prohibits you from doing this. So here as well, not only is the initiator of the proposal external and without the expertise of the State Department and Congress, it's illegal, but even the proposals within these very points also contradict US law.
There's a clear example of how Trump knows how to make deals. After the conflict was resolved by the US president, clashes began on the border between Thailand and Cambodia. Numerous murders, rapes, and other crimes in the African country of Mali are being committed by militants of the African Corps, which is subordinate to the Russian Ministry of Defense, and it replaced Wagner. Accordingly, Ukraine, knowing the treachery of the Russians and the risk of the conflict repeating, is also not insured by anyone.
No other security guarantee more effective than strengthening Ukraine's defense forces can be given to us by anyone. The only thing we can do specifically in the context of security guarantees is to strengthen our army, not reduce it. But when it comes to peace, we see that they want to reduce Ukraine's army.
The son and namesake of the American president, Donald Trump Jr., does not rule out that his father may distance himself from Russia's war against Ukraine if attempts to achieve peace are unsuccessful.
Talks about peace are supported by Russia for only one purpose: to persuade the US to stop further assistance to Ukraine, and at the very least to minimize it. Because the war that Russia was expected to win, first and foremost in Russia, but also in the West, within 4 days, capturing Kyiv and all of Ukraine in 2 months, has now been going on for almost 4 years. And to say that Russia is achieving success would be far, far too optimistic for Russia.
The so-called conquerors are going into Ukraine barefoot and barehanded, and they're the ones saying it themselves.
3.5 years of war. Really? We can't even centrally supply our army with underwear and socks?
Apparently, the Russian command simply doesn't see the point in spending money on their soldiers who are eliminated almost instantly. And to cover up the losses, the dead are listed as deserters. Partisans are the ones reporting this. Despite the problems in Vovchansk, Siversk, Mirnorod, and Pokrovsk caused by the intense pressure from Russian forces, Donbas is holding on, according to Ukrainian war correspondents. Kupiansk is being shelled, but it still stands. Here, the Russian army is also taking a beating from the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
Incredible. Russians are in shock. Gasoline in Russia has become an unattainable luxury. While America is filling up tanks at reduced prices, a fuel apocalypse is unfolding in Putin's Russia. Why is the gasoline catastrophe tearing Russia apart right now? And who is profiting off Russian women? All the details coming up next.
The price of a liter of gasoline in Russia is now higher than in the US. The difference is almost 10%. Such fuel prices haven't been seen since 2021. And this is despite the fact that global oil prices have gone down. One of the reasons, of course, is the constant strikes by the Ukrainian Armed Forces on Russia's oil refining facilities. In the past 10 days, Ukrainian drones have hit oil refineries in Syzran, Ryazan, and struck the Afipsky plant in the Krasnodar region.
Since about July, the intensity of these strikes has been very high, and we don't know the exact number, but a significant portion of oil refining capacity has been put out of commission. This primarily affects gasoline. The situation with gasoline in Russia has always been traditionally tense because back in Soviet times, oil refineries were mainly built to produce fuel oil. And only in the last couple of decades have oil companies started upgrading them.
Since the end of September, the government of the Russian Federation has extended the temporary ban on gasoline exports and introduced restrictions on other types of fuel.
Another decree has imposed a ban on the export of diesel as well as marine fuel and other gas oils, including those purchased on the stock exchange. The restrictions come into effect the day after the decree is issued. The official publication of the order, and it will remain in effect until December 31st, 2025 inclusive. At the same time, the ban does not apply to supplies carried out directly by the producers of these types of fuel. In
20 regions of Russia and the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, there is a fuel shortage following attacks on Russian oil refineries by Ukrainian drones. The shortage is causing a significant increase in prices.
Currently, Russia is short by 40,000 tons every day. In addition, attacks on airports have led to more people traveling by car. In other words, there has been a certain shift from the volume of kerosene consumed to the volume of gasoline consumed.
Another important factor is that most Russian oil refineries have not been modernized for decades, and therefore it is impossible to increase the productivity of the remaining operational plants to meet the needs of ordinary Russians. We have
very few modern oil refining facilities. You take just a few installations offline and you've already created a serious, if not a full-blown crisis, then at least significant tension in the fuel market. It's possible that after further strikes, this tension will only increase. In
the US, fuel prices are falling due to the drop in oil prices, which accounts for almost half the cost of gasoline. In Russia, things are completely different. Prices are rising faster than inflation, even though crude oil accounts for no more than 10% of the production cost. The main part of the price is taxes and fees. Their share reaches 60%. And because of the war in Ukraine, taxes in Russia have started to rise significantly since there's nothing to fill the military budget with. So the average Russian will be forced to buy gasoline at ever higher prices, even as their income keeps shrinking.
And with that, we'll wrap up this episode. We'll keep monitoring the most important events right now, so we can be the first to tell you about them. Don't forget to subscribe. See you soon!